Welcome to the Corporate Law Lab. I'm Neil Taylor, Director of the Corporate Law Center at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. Before we start this week's episode, I want to make sure everyone is aware that March 7th, 2025, we will be putting on the 34th Annual Corporate Law Center Symposium. We have been fortunate to assemble a great group of top-tier academics, corporate counsel, and practitioners to examine the changing administrative law landscape and its effect on business. Space is limited, so please register now. We'll put the link in the show notes. Now on to this week's episode. Raul Tellez is the General Counsel of Luminex and a good friend from way back when we were law students together. Raul has built a long and impressive career, starting off as a litigator, going on to work in important in-house roles in companies like GE, Nortel Networks, and Honeywell. First-year law student Kennedy Akey and I had a super conversation with Raul. There are a lot of takeaways from the conversation, but the one that sticks with me the most is Raul's statement that effective communication is the essence of being a good attorney. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Happy listening.
Our guest today is Raul Tellez. Welcome to the Corporate Law Lab, Raul.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So we went to law school together a long time ago here at UC. So that is how we know each other.
Yeah.
What did you do first after law school?
Well, I'll start by saying when I was in law school, I clerked for General Electric, which was aircraft engines in Evendale here for a while. And then after law school, I continued to do some contract work for them for us a short extension of time. Then I went in-house and worked as an attorney with in cooperation, I'd say, or I wouldn't say partnership, but with a couple of other attorneys in private practice. I did that for several years and ended up working with Shue and Goldberg, which was a small law firm here in Cincinnati. So total time in private practice was around 11 years.
Okay. Kennedy Akey, who I introduced to you before we started recording, is one Ellen, our co-host today, and she's going to do the next few questions.
Sure.
And then I'll pick it back up.
Okay.
So like you said, you spent around 11 years being a litigator before you went in-house. So why did you want to become a litigator?
That's a good question. There was something intriguing, I think, about being a litigator, maybe from watching all the 90s LA law shows and things like
Right.
that, but which might predate people. But I always found that interesting. I love the fast thinking on your feet aspect of being in a courtroom. So I thought it would be a good experience. Law school teaches you the theories and some practical stuff, but it doesn't really teach you the actual, like being in a courtroom. Well, maybe it does nowadays. I don't know, but when I was doing it didn't. So getting that real life trial experience, I thought would be very good for me, and I helped develop my legal skills for sure.
So speaking of those skills, what skills did you get from that first job that you think have served you later on in your career?
Learning to think on your feet and respond quickly. Anticipate what your opponent or the other side might want or need and be ready to answer that. So a lot of preparation. Also, the art of communication. I think to be a good attorney, the essence really in any career, but especially being an attorney, is the art of communication. It's really funny. I think about this, and what I tell people nowadays that work for me is read Strunk and White, the elements of style, and I practice it and preach it all the time. It comes up all the time when I do contracts, because contracts are sometimes written really poorly, and it's like, I know that's what you mean, but that's not what this contract says. So that was very good. And then also for trial work in particular, it's all about serving your client, and in the actual situation of being in the courtroom, it's convincing the judge or the jury what your case is about and how they should rule in your favor. So it's like writing a book almost. You start from at least from my perspective, you start from the end and what goal do you want to accomplish? I want, in a legal litigation case, I want to get a verdict for my client. How do I get that? So then I got to back up and think about the steps I need to convince the judge or the jury to prove my case, and what pieces of evidence are necessary, good, bad, and ugly. Again, the anticipation argument. So those are all skills that I took with me from private practice in the litigation world and have been able to apply them in the corporate world as well. So long answer for a short question.
Now, you mentioned law school and whether or not you got a fair amount of training that was applicable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. I didn't take the trial practice class that we had. Did you?
Yeah, with Professor.
I don't know. I didn't take it.
What's his name?
Weisenberger.
Yeah.
Weisenberger. Yeah.
Yeah, I did take that.
Did you find it useful?
I did.
Okay.
I did. That was small introduction, but introduction into the way you litigate a case and applying the rules of evidence, things like that, putting your case together. And a part of that, if I remember, this is going back a couple of decades, right? But we actually had to take turns being a witness on the stand, playing different characters, and having to subject yourself to direct and cross-examination as well. So it was a good exposure for law school.
That reminds me, I didn't take trial practice, but I was forever serving as a witness for one of you guys.
Yeah, there you go.
I was a terribly unpredictable witness too. I couldn't remember what my lines were supposed to be, and I'd just wing it.
Yeah.
Big surprise there, huh? One of your first in-house roles was in compliance export control. This was with GE IT Solutions.
Yes.
So different than the aircraft engine.
Correct. It was a different division of GE at the time.
So why did you make the switch from litigation to going in-house?
Well, it kind of goes back before law school. When I was thinking of going to law school, I'd always thought that maybe that's where I might want to end up doing the corporate stuff. But, I kind of had a little bit of a split personality in terms of liking the litigation stuff, but also liking the corporate world as well. So fortunately, I was able to do a little bit of both. But the opportunity came up to join or rejoin GE. I liked IT related topics, so I thought that was a good field as well, and it was a good opportunity.
You said it came up. Did it come to you, or did you decide I've had enough of this keeping track of my life in 6-minute increments?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both, but I don't recall how exactly it came up, but I think there was an opening that I just applied for, is my best recollection on that one.
Had you represented them before you?
Not that division, no.
Okay.
No.
Did you expect it to be a big lifestyle change?
Expect?
Yeah.
No.
We'll get into the reality afterwards.
Yeah.
But what was your expectation when you said, okay, I'm putting my timesheet away. I'm not going to go. I don't have to chase to get new clients anymore. I have one client. They're going to be there every day. All of that sounds great.
Yeah.
Is that what you were thinking too?
That I would definitely, no one likes to bill and keep track of your time and, how much time you take to think about a case, to do this or do that, and what's really a billable hour and what's not. And there's pressure on you from partners to put in, I guess, a minimum number of hours, so forth and so on, long, hard work. And also I will say, I like practicing law. When I was in private practice, and you guys may find this out, who's ever listening, but, part of my time, I'd say a quarter to a third of my time was spent practicing law. The other chunk of it was consoling clients. So a lot of psychology involved with practicing law, not all technically legally related, but there was a lot of hand holding, a lot of other kind of non-legal stuff that goes, and then plus the billing, which really isn't the practice of law. It's like getting paid for the practice of law. So there's a lot of time that can go involved in that. And it really kind of cuts back on the amount, I found anyway for me, of what of the amount of time you can actually spend practicing law. Now, I was in a smaller law firm, so there were not the resources that a bigger firm might have, like a billing department and things like that. So obviously, everyone's going to have a little bit of a different experience. But I really like the aspect of being able to just go in and spend more of my time actually practicing, quote unquote, the areas of law.
I think there's been also an evolution in the practice of law. When I was in a fairly large law firm.
Yeah.
And not only did I not make photocopies very often, my secretary didn't make photocopies. There were people downstairs that did that.
Right.
And, as my career's progressed, and I'm sure it's probably true for you as well, I've taken on more and more and more of that kind of administration because, we had partners that didn't know how to check their email.
Wow.
Didn't exist. And why should they have to learn it? And, for us who, there's the whole battle between whether you should be recording memos or typing them yourself. In a small law firm, you were probably typing them yourself from early on. Right?
Yeah, most of it. We did have some legal assistants and secretaries that helped out on some of the things, just not everything. So, when it came to putting exhibits together for my trials, I would do a lot of that, but I did have a little bit of help, but mostly I did, that is one difference, I think, with corporate law departments. They're not going to be staffed the same way in terms of resources that a law firm, especially a mid to larger law firm, is going to be staffed with the additional paralegals and other resources that you may have. So you do take on a lot more of that administrative responsibility. And that's not true just for the legal department in a corporate setting, but for other departments as well. That's just the way it is. So be prepared for that.
Did you expect it to be a different lifestyle, and did you find that it was? Or was it just a lot of work in different ways?
A little bit of both. So I did find it was a little bit of a different lifestyle in that, with litigation, you have to be in court at a certain time. You have to turn in your briefs by a certain date. You have to do this, and that. And sometimes, I'd be up till, there were times when I was up until, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning preparing for a deposition or court the next day. And that was kind of exhausting. But you have to be prepared for your case. So you got to do what you got to do. I didn't enjoy that too much, but so going in-house, I didn't have quite, I had other deadlines, but not quite those that were dependent on a court, that were absolute. There's a little bit more flexibility sometimes in the corporate world. Now I'm busier in a number of other ways that I wouldn't have to be in private practice. So it's a little bit of a balance, but I don't know. I feel like maybe there's a little bit less pressure in terms of deadlines and getting things done by absolute deadlines in the corporate department versus a law firm department. I think now there's a lot of exceptions and challenges to that. I get that, but just in general.
There are deadlines that are real deadlines.
Right.
The end of the year is coming, whether you like it or not.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Right.
But on the other hand, you can also give your client a call the way you couldn't do to a judge,
right?
And say, I couldn't get to you today.
Yeah. If a vice president or the CEO needs something by such and such deadline and you can't make it by that deadline because you're waiting on somebody else or whatever, you just call them up or shoot them an email or a text and just say, hey, look, I need till tomorrow morning, blah, blah, blah. No big deal. Private practice, you're filing a motion, you're doing this, you got no filing, it's a lot more involved in that. So you can do it, but it's just different.
So at GE, IT Solutions, yeah. You were in the compliance area. So at this time, this is turn of the century, right? There was a lot of development work of training programs at that point. At least that's what I was in a compliance role at AvNet at the time. And
yeah,
we were constantly developing new programs. Is that you were doing a lot of that as well?
Well, fortunately, when I joined, GE had already developed their program. It was called the Integrity Program, right. And it was pretty comprehensive. And they rolled that out through all of their divisions globally, really, but just focusing on the U.S., all the U.S. divisions in particular. And so we had a lot of resources already there. But in addition to that, though, I still developed some of our own individual risk policies. and ethics policies, compliance policies that more fit that particular division. So there's a little bit of development in that for sure, and then a lot of training.
Yeah, I remember when the company I was working for acquired a GE division that was selling servers, and I got the GE compliance person as part of the deal, and I said, "What have you been focused on in the last year?" And it was it was, oh my God, I'll remember. I'm forgetting the word for it. I know exactly what it was. Money laundering.
Yes,
Anti-money laundering training,
yep.
which I know was a huge deal at GE.
Yeah.
But my question was, how can you use a server to launder money? That's got to be really hard. You know, they're not very fungible.
Yeah.
And she just looked at me and said it was what was directed by corporate, so I did it. And okay, I get it. So you probably had some of that as well, and then that's why you were developing some training that was particularly applicable to your division?
Yeah, and it wasn't just limited to anti-money laundering. I mean, it was all the compliance programs, supply chain relationships, employment issues, anti-harassment, those kinds of things, export control, all of those different areas I was involved in.
Supply chain had to be a big part of it, especially when you were selling services.
Yes, definitely. That was part of it.
Okay. What worked well? What worked less well? Was there a go-to thing that you were like, people always attend this, like it, don't complain about it? What does success look like when you're in a compliance role?
That was always, I think, a 50-50 question. Is your compliance program successful because you have more employees reporting issues, or is it because they're not? I mean, how do you measure what's a good turnout or what's not? Is it because if you're not getting a lot of calls, is that because you have a really good compliance program and all of your employees are ethical, or is it they're hiding stuff and no one's reporting it? So you never really know. When I was at GE in particular, though, we always had, I wouldn't say a steady stream, but we always had a minimum number that we seemed to get. So we knew that we were reaching people. And then, of course, we would assess them for, if they were truly a compliance related issue that I could get involved in, or if it was more like an employee just complaining or something about an issue that really wasn't compliance related. But the fact is, the good thing about it is people use the hotline, they use the emails, and they reached out on that. So we knew we were reaching people one way or the other.
Yeah, I always used to get on the hotline, a lot of the complaints were along the lines of, my boss is a jerk. And at first, when those would come in, you'd say, well, I'm the compliance department, whether he's a jerk or not, and it was always a he.
Right.
It was acting like a jerk, right? Whether he's a jerk or not isn't a compliance issue. I'll just shove it over to HR and I've closed that file. But I also found that when they were reporting that the boss is a jerk, there was usually something else going on as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was it similar?
Yeah, there was something going on. I tried not to delve into those too much if it really wasn't compliance related, because sometimes, most times I would say it was more of a personality conflict between two people versus a true compliance issue. Now, of course, if the employee were to allege that it was harassment of some sort, then that would always trigger a red flag, at least in terms of us looking into it, inquiring whether there's any substance there or not.
So later in your career, we're going to skip and come back, because you did something very similar at Nortel to what you were doing at GE.
Yes.
But I think you were more in charge of the program at Nortel, correct?
Well, at GE, I was in charge of the program at my division versus all of GE. When I went to Nortel, I was in charge of initially all of the North American compliance program. That, as the company evolved and changed and went through their troubles that they had, my role expanded to be global at that point. So I spent a chunk of the time doing global compliance.
How similar were the roles? Was it like, completely different, or were there similarities?
I would say there were more similarities than not because, I would say when I went to Nortel, I took my GE compliance experience and applied it. So for me, it was more similar than not. Of course, Nortel had its own policies and way of doing things, but a lot of the underlying substance you're complying with U.S. law. So you're still striving towards the same objective to meet those requirements. And then we were talking about in both at GE and Nortel if there were criminal sanctions that were possible, the U.S. sentencing guidelines and what you came up with and how those apply to the compliance program. So those are all very similar in both companies.
And the UK Bribery Act probably came out right about the time you were at Nortel, right?
It did. It did. I did not have a lot of issues with that one that I had to deal with. That was, as far as I recall, that was around the same time, and that's when the Nortel role might have been winding down a little bit.
Yeah, it was pretty much the same thing.
But
the only difference was that facilitation payments were outlawed under the UK Bribery Act as well. That was the major difference. There was a lot of different words used. And because they were English, there were more words.
More words, definitely more words.
Okay, to my English friends, I'm sorry.
We apologize.
The global nature, though, of your role at Nortel, what was that like?
Sorry, in terms of...
You've got a whole... How many countries were you guys in?
Oh, my gosh. In the beginning versus the end, I don't even remember. It was global. I mean, U.S., Canada, Mexico, China, let's just say EMEA. So we had all of that, and Asia Pac. I remember the acronym. So all of those countries would be in that. Asia Pacific, Australia, all that. We were in all of those. Yeah.
How did you sleep at night knowing that there was somebody somewhere doing something you didn't want them to be doing?
Well, I closed my eyes and plugged up my ears. And no, well, the other thing too is I wasn't doing at Nortel, I wasn't doing this alone. So I had other compliance directors in the field that were local contacts that would help to administer the compliance program. And some of the, obviously in some of these countries, English isn't the native language. So having someone local who could speak the local language and also who was more familiar with the local laws was very beneficial and a lot of those things could be handled at that level where I didn't have to get involved. Other than we would do monthly reporting, and so any of the issues that came up would be things that I would report on to our CEO or the board of directors.
So you probably had one of those dotted line relationships to the board?
Yeah, dotted line to a couple of different people, but the board being one of them. Yes.
The audit committee in particular.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Did you conduct not only training but also investigations of issues that came up?
Yeah, both at GE and at Nortel, I led all the investigations, at least where maybe again with the exception of in Nortel where people were my directors were doing the remote investigations, but I would still oversee those. But I would do hands-on investigations for the U.S. and Canada, Mexico too. Yeah.
How did you decide? Did you have a blanket rule about when to involve outside counsel in an investigation, or was it more of a gut feel for this one looks like it's too much work, or there's potential criminal sanctions, or whatever? How did you decide when you got help, or did you just always do it yourself?
I did it usually mostly myself, but I will say that I was fortunate in that the issues that I dealt with did not necessarily require me to go to outside counsel or to have to think about filing a criminal complaint, so to speak, or turning it over to authorities. Well, you know what? I take that back. There were, I can't say. I thought about that, and then as I'm talking about this, I'm thinking that we did have a case where an employee was using his company issued laptop, and on the laptop there was some child pornography. Yeesh. So pornography is not good anyway, especially in a company setting. But child pornography is when you call the FBI or your local, but usually the FBI, local authorities, but they'll turn it over to the FBI because it's usually cross state lines. So that'll implicate stuff. So we did do some of that, yeah, a little bit.
And that's one that there was no question in your mind about. A, I'm going to report it, and B, I'm not conducting this investigation.
Right, it's just it's there. We found it on the computer. It's there. There's no. It's hard to explain that away, you know.
Did you ever have? I just tell you one of the things I struggled with as a chief ethics and compliance officer, in that I was reaching out to employees saying, please let us know, because as you were talking about before, one of the hallmarks of an effective compliance program is that people are using it.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, please talk to me, tell me what your problems are. But I was also widely considered Darth Vader.
Yep.
Right? So who really does go to Darth Vader with their problems?
Yeah. So we always have, the option of an employee being able to report a situation anonymously. And the disclaimer was, if you don't provide any contact information, there's no way I can follow up with you to let you know that we are doing an investigation or that we resolved it. So if you don't provide us that contact information, we may well have taken care of this and looked at it and conducted impose some type of disciplinary action, which may or may not have included termination, but there's no way I can report back to the employee. So it's really up to you, employee, if you want to report anonymously or not. And I'd always have a disclaimer like that. And so if the employee, it didn't affect anything that as long as I had enough information to proceed, then I would proceed. It's just whether the employee was updated.
Okay.
What was the most challenging part of your roles at both of these companies with all of these investigations and interacting with the employees? What was the hardest part for you?
I think one of the hardest things was, and I use this term for lack of a better term, but imposing or ensuring that the HR department imposed the correct disciplinary action on the employee, especially if that employee is a salesperson. Because, in a corporate world, you think about this, when you're in private practice as an attorney, you're actually the salesperson. You're billing hours. You're generating revenue for the law firm. So you are a profit center. And when you're making money for a company or a law firm, lots of times, things might be a little easier to justify it, put it that way, not illegal, but maybe easier to justify. But in a corporate world as an attorney, you're a cost center, just like everybody else. If you're not in sales, you're a cost center. But the concept is still the same for salespeople and the marketing department. They're the ones who are generating the revenue. So sometimes I did have a situation or two where an employee committed what I thought were pretty egregious ethics violations, and should have been more harshly disciplined, I think, than what they were. But that's not my decision at the end of the day. It's the CEO's role and HR. I mean, really a combination, but I don't have the ultimate authority to mandate that. So that was a little frustrating and the reason it's frustrating is like, you do this work, you find this, it's like, yeah, but right. But the other thing too is that other employees see that somebody got away with something, right? Yeah. And then that's not a good precedent either. So you have to be really careful, and that's why you really have to think twice about how far you want to go with an investigation, what's really involved in it, how serious is it really, and is it worth going, that extra mile that you think you might need to get this resolved.
I developed a shorthand with the CEO that I worked for of 1s, 2s, and 3s. The 1s were the people that were actively involved in misconduct that had to get some sanction. And you're right, but at some point you had to say what that sanction is. I can't. Right. I can tell you that whether or not we're judged to have an effective ethics and compliance program is going to be judged by whether or not this sanction is viewed as effective.
Right.
So if you've got somebody involved in something truly horrific and you keep them around because they're a good salesperson or they're part of the golf foursome on Sunday, it's not good.
Right.
And then 2s were the people that, knew something was going on, maybe didn't speak up. They were in the zone, in the blast zone, but not necessarily responsible.
Yeah.
And those people, I would always say, just counsel them. They don't need. And then the 3s were the heroes, the that
Yeah.
they was aware of the problems.
That's
right?
a good way of looking at it.
And he would then start meetings like, do you have any ones? Yes, yes
Got
sir,
a
a
few
few ones. But yeah, I think that, and it's one of those things where you don't want your compliance program known as we're the people that run around shooting people, getting them out of the company, because then people are less likely to
Right.
raise problems, even though that's the right thing to do in that situation.
Yeah.
So in between GE and Nortel, you were doing Great American. Correct?
Yes.
I can see you looking for
which
it.
one was that? Yeah.
I've looked at your LinkedIn profile more recently than you have. And there you were supporting, I think, the procurement team and the IT team? Is
Mostly
that right?
the IT team, but that was, the procurement of IT resources and software applications, things like that. So it was a little bit of both, but yeah.
It seems in hindsight like a very related career path. Did it, because procurement is so much and IT is so much what you were doing at GE IT Solutions and again at Nortel, that it doesn't seem, looking at it, like this is a departure. Did it seem at the time that it was?
A little bit. I did not do as much in the compliance realm at Great American. I did more of the commercial contract work. I did some of that at GE as well and Nortel, but much more so at Great American. By the way, when you're a corporate attorney, you're not just, unless it's a big company with a big law department, you wear multiple hats. So I always say that I'm a jack of all trades and a master of some, not all, but some disciplines, right? So you definitely get your exposure to different areas of law that way.
Well, master of some. I always introduce myself as I'm general counsel, which means I know a lot. I know very little about a lot of things.
Exactly. That's what I call it, general.
Yeah. So with the Great American, did you think of that as a specialist role? And I guess I didn't talk about it at GE or at Nortel, so you can apply this to any one of the three. How did you learn about the business in those roles? Was it similar? Was there a program? Did you just pick things up?
It's in the companies I've worked for, most of them, it's very not difficult. There's not a formalized way for an attorney to learn about the business more than anybody else, right? So, but what I always like to do, and what I did at I'd say, each of the jobs that I had, each of the companies I worked for, is I would always try to get permission, of course, but I would always try to attend a couple of sales calls, whether it was actually meeting a client in person with the sales team or listening in on a phone conversation or a conference call. Of course, I would be introduced, and the other side would always have to agree to it, because I didn't want them thinking I was there for legal purposes. I was there more for learning purposes. So those were avenues into understanding the business a little bit better and how the sales team actually worked, because you're as part of my role as in-house counsel, I'm doing a lot of sales contracts and procurement contracts, but sales contracts. So I got to understand what these sales guys are talking about and what they want and what they're negotiating and what their products and services are, what they're providing. So that was my way of doing it. And then delving into the contracts and understanding that a little bit more with each transaction.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Often CEOs kind of have a blind spot about why their attorney needs to learn anything about the business. I mean, I remember at one company I was at, we had a new CFO join like 6 months after I joined as GC, and they sent him to the most successful division for 3 weeks for him to learn the business inside and out. And I'm like, well, why didn't I go there?
Yeah.
And they said there wasn't a problem. You only get to go where there are problems. I'm like, oh, okay. It took me much longer to learn the business. As a
Yeah,
result.
it does. It does. But I always look for those kind of opportunities where you can get involved, even if it's negotiating a contract with the other side. I did one this morning, right before I left to come here, actually, with this was a customer on the procurement side. But again, it provides insight into the business at least from the supply side. So, yeah, there's always opportunities like that. You just have to look for them.
So Nortel, if I remember correctly, Nortel went. I'm making motions for an audio podcast, but they went out of business.
They
right?
they went downhill. Yeah. Unfortunately.
So what did you do next?
Well,
But I guess talk about kind of recovering from that, because I mean you certainly didn't put Nortel out of business,
no.
but it's still, when you're in a company that goes through that, it feels like it at times.
Yeah, I was one of the last employees there. I think there was still a handful when I left, but definitely it was very close to lights out on that. And they had filed bankruptcy in, I think, the U.S., Canada, UK, and maybe Brazil. I think it was like a global multiple bankruptcies going on at the same time. I'm not sure if I have all the countries correct, but that's my recollection. So, yeah, that was a hard one and a long one that took quite a number of years to go through.
And a ton of work. Yeah, that's the worst part of it when things are going badly, is the work. There's less people to do the work. The amount of work in the legal department doesn't go down; it goes up.
Right. So, if you looked at my profile, I started off as North American compliance director, and then I became, global privacy officer and chief security officer. Yeah, like all these things kept on expanding as the company was consolidating. So, but it was a great experience. It was a great opportunity for me. So, take the good with the not so good, I guess.
And from Nortel, you ended up in Honeywell, right? In a Honeywell division.
Yeah, it was called Intelligrated Systems at the time. Intelligrated eventually sold to Honeywell, and I think they went by the name of Honeywell Intelligrated. And I'm guessing now, I haven't looked at it in a while, but I'm guessing now it's just Honeywell. I guess Intelligrated doesn't. I don't know. I don't think it has that name. They use that name anymore. But when I was there, it was Intelligrated.
Okay.
But the same company. Yeah.
And here you were doing really focused on transactional work, right?
Commercial contracts primarily. Yeah.
How did you find the difference? Was it more rewarding, less rewarding, more exciting, less exciting, more secure?
Yeah, all of the above in different ways than the previous roles. So, the good thing I like about doing contracts, especially big ones, is that when you ink a deal and it's done, you get this kind of like, great, we got to win kind of thing. And and maybe perhaps an indirect kind of way, going back to my days in private practice, if I got a good verdict from my client, it was that same kind of, feeling, that win, that victory kind of thing. And that was a good thrill, I guess, for the moment. So, when we would ink these deals at Intelligrated, there were some pretty big multi-million-dollar ones. Those were always good ones to celebrate for sure.
Yeah, and I think one of the differences, especially when you're in litigation, many, many cases settle in litigation, and nobody's ever really happy with the settlement. That you reach a point where both sides reach the same level of unhappiness and decide to settle. And so when you get into the transactional side, everybody gets to be happy when you get the deal done.
Yeah, maybe not 100% on everything, but on a lot of things. Yeah. And when you settle a case, when you settle a case and neither side is happy, that's a good settlement. I mean, really, because everyone had to give a little bit to get to that meeting point.
Yeah, if you're in a settlement conference and the other side is high-fiving on the way out, it's like, oops.
Yeah, it's probably not so good.
So let's talk about where you are today.
Okay.
Luminex.
Yes.
What does Luminex do?
Luminex is a holding company, a parent holding company with two main operating divisions, Candlelight Company and Party Light Gifts. They both are in the candle making business, candle distribution, but they approach it in different ways, different business models with different markets. So on the candlelight side, it's primarily B2B, so business to business. With we do have an online portal on our website for D2C. On the party light side, they are more decorative candles, like home decor, kind of different vessels that your candle would fit in. And those are going to be all D2C in various formats, depending on the country that we're operating in. But most of the candles are made in our factory in Leesburg, Ohio.
So you're still doing local manufacturing?
Yeah. We're cutting back on local. We're outsourcing a little bit more these days, but most of it is still what we say is poured in the USA.
Poured, okay.
We pour the candles in the USA.
And the company's been around for 100 years?
1840, I believe, is on our website.
Wow.
Yeah. In one form or another, not necessarily under the Candlelight name, but the company will trace its roots back to that. Yeah, here in Cincinnati.
So are you also doing private label for other?
Yes.
So you make the candle and somebody else sells it as Bob's Candles.
Right. Not Bob, but in our case, we sell candles to Walmart under the Mainstays brand.
Okay.
So we are one of the largest, if not the largest, supplier of candles to Walmart, at least in the U.S. There are other producers of Mainstays candles, and we also manufacture some candles that are sold at Walmart under the Better Homes and Garden brand as well.
How much of your job then is relationship management with key suppliers and customers?
I'll tweak that question a little bit. I would say 90% of my job is key relationships with people internally who have those relationships with the suppliers and customers. But I do get involved with those folks as necessary, like I mentioned this morning on the call that I had. But it's all about relationship building, whether it's internal or external. It's all about that at the end of the day, for sure.
You've taken on over the years other roles as well. In addition to being a litigator, compliance professional, a complex commercial negotiator, you've also run IT and HR?
Yeah, I at Luminex for an interim period of time, I was in charge of the HR department, and currently, in addition to the legal function, I also am running the IT department as well. Now, let me clarify that to say I'm not in the weeds of the IT. I do have a whole IT department with a director who reports into me, who manages a little bit more or a lot more, depending on the issue of the day-to-day kind of activities. But I'm involved in the strategy and overseeing of the overall administration of the IT department. I would not call myself a CIO or anything like that. But.
So the HR seems like kind of a natural fit because often as the GC, you're talking to HR anyway all the time. Yeah. IT seems like a different animal. I mean, but you've got you have a background in technology.
A little bit of a background in that from my other roles, but I think my main reason for being involved in the IT department is for the strategic development of the department and the administration of the way the IT department functions. So just by way of a little bit of a further explanation, as I mentioned before, Luminex has the candlelight side and the party light side, and there's a whole bunch of history behind those entities. They started off as being completely separate entities, owned by different parent companies, but we're now owned by one. And so some of the back office operations need to be shared. That would include finance and IT, HR, things like that. So on the candlelight side, some of our resources we were short on some of our resources for candlelight and maybe a little heavy on the party light side. And then some of the party light resources are here in the U.S., some are in Europe, this and that. So we had to rebalance some of that, and so my role has been figuring out how do we reallocate some of those resources and who's best suited to do what. So I come from a little bit of an outside perspective, managing and administrating the department versus getting into the weeds of. I get into the weeds a little bit, but in terms of the actual day-to-day things that some of the IT team does, I don't get involved in that per se.
Did you get training along the way on how to manage people, or did you just figure it
Street. You picked it up. I learned from my mistakes, and hopefully, as I got a little older and a little bit more seasoned, I've perhaps become a little bit more humble and a little bit more open-minded, and just a little bit more. I would like to think I'm a little bit more insightful, having had experiences with different perspectives.
Yeah, when I look back to the first time, when I look back to the first time I was asked to manage a team, it doesn't so much scare me how little I knew, but how much I thought I knew compared to how little I knew. I was just like, well, I can do this. Of course I can do it.
Of course, yeah, you can do that.
And yeah, I could eventually, but not. It didn't come naturally.
No.
It wasn't a natural progression from being a litigator or managing litigation.
I couldn't agree more. I always say to people that I speak with that the older I get, the more I realize the less I know. There's always something to learn every day. It seems like.
It might even be like the definition of becoming wise.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about outside counsel because we haven't mentioned them yet.
Sure.
They might be listening. So they want to get the plugs in. You're now a very small department.
Yes.
So you must have to rely on outside counsel to a greater extent than you might in a big legal department.
Yes, for sure.
So what works best in a relationship with outside counsel?
I would say, and we work with several different law firms, right? But I would say developing a good relationship with the attorneys that you work with at these law firms is key because you have to develop an element of trust, and you have to be able to know that you can ask them to do some work on an issue and have confidence that they're going to support you and that they're going to give you good advice, good counsel, timely advice and counsel, I would say is also very important. That's what works best. What doesn't work best, and believe it or not, we deal with this, but sometimes not all attorneys are good communicators, which is why I always go back to being a good attorney is the essence of effective communication. And that doesn't always happen even with law firms. So those are the ones that I tend not to use as much unless I really, really have to. But developing that rapport and knowing who you can go to for whatever particular topic, that's what's in my mind key.
How do you think that those relationships are best developed? I mean, it's probably not on the golf course, right?
No, not for me. It's more on element of time, just working with someone over time, getting to know them a little bit better, getting a feel for it. I would also say different networking events as well. One of my good friends and colleagues at Frost just invited me to speak at a product liability conference in Tucson last week. And that was obviously built on a relationship that we have. And so I was very honored to be asked to go and speak as on one of the panels.
It's not the first thing I thought about with candles, but I mean, I guess, you've got a product that's designed to be lit on fire.
Oh yeah, they are inherently dangerous. People don't think about it, but candles can be dangerous. And I was actually joking about that. Well, not joking, but relaying it. It was a little bit of humor involved. But at the conference last week, when you look at a candle, all the instructions are on the bottom label. So the time to read that label, which probably a lot of people don't do, is before you light the candle, not after. Right. So yeah, there's a lot going on with candle manufacturing. It's not just pour the wax and a few drops of fragrance. There's a lot more involved in that.
How deferential are you to the expertise of outside counsel, and has it changed over time?
It depends on the issue.
Okay.
So if it's a regulatory issue or something that deals with regulatory compliance, and it's something that I don't know a whole lot about, then I defer to them. Absolutely. If it's a commercial transaction, usually I rely on myself a little bit more because I'm more familiar with the ins and out and the internal folks within the company who are more tied to it than, say, outside counsel. I will involve outside counsel as needed, however, but I tend to stay more in charge of those issues.
So what are the major areas of focus? If you had to say, these are if I'm doing these 3 or 4 things, or I don't know, maybe there's 20 that you have to keep your eye on consistently.
Ooh, you mean currently at Luminex? Or
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of contracts that I do. There's litigation management that I oversee, intellectual property management, so managing our IP portfolio, or I would say a trademark portfolio in particular. Those come to mind. We have a lot of operations on the party light side in Europe, and a lot of people, from a U.S. side, oh, it's Europe. It's like, our 50 states, but just different countries, and a little bit of different language. It's not. Every despite the fact that a lot of countries are in the EU, they still have their own individual laws and regulations, and there can be a lot of nuances between the law in France and the law in Germany, and those are our 2 biggest markets in Europe. So there's a lot of nuance involved in that, and that can be very tricky as well.
Have you had to do a lot of travel to Europe as part of that?
I was there last year on a trip meeting some folks. I haven't gone back this year. Maybe next year we'll see. Yeah.
What do you think the key is to educating the business to allow you to add the most value?
I'll say this in the most polite way that I can, but inserting myself into situations, in the most diplomatic way, I should say. If I hear something, I'm involved in something in a meeting or whatever, I will make sure to speak up and say, well, let me see this, let me know about this, let me take a look at this. That's usually what happens at the start, and then over time, people kind of get used to me, and it's like, oh yeah, well, automatically just include me. But I still will tell them to make sure that I get whatever document that I need, or I'm invited to a certain meeting if I need to.
I mean, when I started and in a role that had me supporting a business as opposed to an area,
yeah,
right. So when I was the litigation person, people only talked to me about litigation.
Right.
Occasionally, people would come and ask me, "How is this going to play in litigation?" Like the contracts department. But then when I was supporting a business, we used to joke that you have to build up your meeting calluses. Because the only way you're going to figure out what's actually happening is by going to those meetings that they didn't think to invite you to.
Right. That's absolutely true. That is so true.
Kennedy, did you have something else you wanted to jump in on?
I have a more general question for you.
Sure.
What do you think was the best piece of advice you've gotten throughout your career that was most impactful on you?
Oh my. Knowing when to speak up and knowing when not to speak up, I think is a very good piece of advice. And that's something that you just kind of learn over time, right. I think, I think we've all had situations where, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Yeah. And then there's other times when you think, oh, I wish I would have spoken up. But sometimes hindsight's 20/20. So understanding that and trying to anticipate that as best you can, I think is a good piece of advice. And not only that, knowing what to say, as opposed to, in addition to when to say it and how to say it. There's always an art of that too.
You were talking earlier about when you were a litigator and how we learned to think on our feet, and react quickly. And it took me a long time in an in-house role to not be that person.
Mm-hmm.
Same for you?
Oh yeah. Because you're used to like, my mind would go 100 miles an hour, right? And I had to like unlearn some of that to say, let me get back with you on that. Let me take a look at this, because it's always the case where you think you have all the information, but then you find out you don't, because someone forgot to mention something to you or didn't think it was important or whatever, and then you find out like, oh, well, had I known that, I would have given a little bit of a different advice. So I always try to be a little more cautious nowadays before handing out a final answer. And I've learned to ask more questions about what about this, what about that, before I will give an answer.
So we graduated in the days before the internet. How much has technology?
Gosh, can you believe that?
I know. It really didn't exist.
No,
it
there was
wasn't
no internet. We didn't have emails. We still did stuff. I mean, like the computer, the Lexus and Westlaw computers at the library were high tech.
Yeah, and there were only 2 of them.
And there's only, that's right. The photocopies, putting coins into the photocopy machine to copy pages. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So there's been that change. How much has it affected your practice? How much are you a consumer of technology to be able to do your job now?
It's night and day. I think it's exploded. The volume. Some of it's good, some of it's not. Right. The good part is that you have quicker access to information, quicker responses. That's very good. But the volume of data, my Outlook inbox is just explosive. So so there's a lot there. So it's really changed over the years. I think overall it's good though. I would say, yeah.
Yeah, I remember in the early days of the internet, the IT department would send you messages saying your mailbox has got too much in it. You need to delete messages. And I haven't had one of those.
That was the days before the cloud. Yeah. And when I would get those messages, that was the first message I would delete to help clear up my inbox. Okay, we'll start with that one.
When you couldn't sort to figure out what the one that was actually causing the problem was back then. You'd have, one cartoon somebody sent you that was like, 80 megabytes. You didn't realize.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so going back to whatever year that was, we graduated so long ago. If you could go back and have a chat with Raul that's just about to graduate, what would you tell him?
Well, I don't know if I should say the answer that you and I talked about. That I mentioned
do whatever you want. It's your floor.
So the humorous answer is when we were in law school, the old law school building was right across the street from Uncle Woody's. And so Thursday afternoons, Friday afternoons were a time when we all went there especially after finals, but on the weekends as well. So I would say maybe cut back on that a little bit. I would say if you're asking me if I go back and do it over again, yes. Would I do it a little bit differently? Yes, we all would, because hindsight's 20/20. I would try, I think back then I was more worried about the competition and competing with everybody and making sure that I wasn't like blah, 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 this and everyone, I don't worry about that anymore. So I would say not to put that additional stressor on yourself, because you don't need it. Just go at your own pace and do your own thing and kind of ignore everybody, be your own person.
Mike Tavis is going to be number 1 in the class, and there's nothing you can do
about
it.
That's correct. Mike, if you're listening.
Okay. Kennedy, anything else?
No, I think I'm good.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right.